In 1966, the Monkees launched their recording career with one of the brightest and catchiest pop songs of the decade. But beneath the jangling guitar, driving rhythm, and infectious chorus of Last Train to Clarksville may be a much darker story. A young man saying goodbye before leaving on a journey from which he may never return. Was this television band's first major hit simply a clever love song, or did its writers quietly hide a Vietnam-era war message inside a radio-friendly pop record? Today, we dive deep into the Monkees' Last Train to Clarksville. Welcome back to another Senior Spinner Deep Dive, where we uncover the history, mystery, and surprising stories behind some of music's most memorable songs. For today's investigation, I gave Danny the Diver a rather interesting assignment. I asked him to determine whether Last Train to Clarksville, the upbeat debut hit by the Monkees, may actually have been one of the earliest mainstream pop songs to carry a hidden message about the Vietnam War. To help us separate fact from interpretation, let's bring in our resident researcher, Danny the Diver.
Thank you, Crispy. I examined the song's lyrics, the recollections of its writers, the creation of the Monkees, the Beatles' influence behind the recording, and the historical setting in which it was released.
So you spent 3 days researching a train schedule?
Not exactly.
Good, because the train left in 1966.
Ignore him, Danny. Let's begin with the band itself. The Monkees were one of the biggest musical acts of the 1960s. But before they became a band, they were created for a television show.
So they were actors pretending to be musicians?
That is how many critics describe them. But the real story is more complicated.
And that's where today's deep dive begins. To understand the song, we first need to understand the Monkees themselves.
The group did not begin in the traditional way. 4 musicians didn't meet in a garage, form a band, and struggle their way into a recording contract.
The Monkees were assembled for a television comedy series created by producers Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider.
Their concept was strongly influenced by the energy and humor of the Beatles' film A Hard Day's Night. The idea was to create a television program about the adventures of a struggling young rock band.
So before the Monkees had a television show, they weren't actually the Monkees.
Correct. Hundreds of performers reportedly answered a trade advertisement seeking young men for the series. Mickey Dolenz, Davy Jones, Michael Nesmith, and Peter Tork were ultimately selected.
In other words, they auditioned for a band the same way somebody auditions for a sitcom.
That is one reason critics later dismissed them as the Prefab Four, a manufactured imitation of the Beatles' Fab Four.
On their earliest recordings, the members generally supplied the lead vocals, while experienced studio musicians performed much of the instrumental backing. That arrangement was common in the record industry, but it became especially controversial because the television program presented the 4 men as a functioning band.
So the critics said they were fake.
Yes, but that description leaves out an important part of the story. Nesmith and Tork were already capable musicians, and all 4 eventually fought for greater control over their recordings. By the time of the album Headquarters, they were playing together extensively and participating much more directly in the creative process.
They may have been assembled for television, but they grew into a real musical group.
Before the television audience had even met the Monkees, the producers needed songs strong enough to launch both the series and the records. Songwriters Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart were brought in to help establish the group's early musical identity. They wrote and produced several important Monkees recordings, including their theme song and their debut single.
No pressure, just invent the sound of a band that didn't exist yet.
That is a reasonably accurate description.
The debut single was recorded in July 1966 and released in late August, several weeks before the television series premiered in September.
So America heard the band before it really saw the band.
Exactly. And the voice on that first single belonged to Mickey Dolenz, who had been assigned the role of the group's drummer.
Assigned?
Dolenz was not originally a drummer. He had to learn how to play the instrument for the program.
That's encouraging. I may audition as a surgeon tomorrow.
Great. I got just the training tool for that.
What the heck is that?
It's a training tool for surgeons. Go practice.
Last Train to Clarksville was recorded before the TV series premiered and became the Monkees' debut single, with Mickey Dolenz singing lead. The instrumental backing was supplied by musicians associated with Boyce and Hart rather than by the Four Monkees as a self-contained band.
The Beatles' influence on Last Train to Clarksville was not accidental.
Bobby Hart later recalled hearing the Beatles' Paperback Writer on the radio. Near the end of the record, he misheard the repeated title and thought Paul McCartney was singing something that sounded like Take the Last Train.
So one of the Monkees' biggest songs began because somebody misunderstood the Beatles?
In part, yes.
Interesting.
Oh, damn it.
Once Hart realized what McCartney was actually singing, he retained the idea of a last train and began building a new story around it.
The influence extended beyond the words.
Tommy Boyce wanted the song to open with a distinctive guitar figure, something listeners would recognize immediately. The goal was similar to the memorable riffs heard on Beatles records such as I Feel Fine, Day Tripper, and Paperback Writer.
And then there's that repeated vocal sound between the lines.
Son of a...
The rapid rhythmic backing vocals imitate the urgency and momentum of a moving train without attempting a realistic train whistle. Everything about the recording moves forward. The guitars race, the drums push, and Dolenz delivers the words with almost breathless excitement.
Which is why nobody listening casually thinks this sounds like a song about war.
For crying out loud!
And that contrast is central to the mystery. Hart's initial lyrical idea came from mishearing Paperback Writer, while Boyce deliberately pursued the kind of instantly identifiable guitar riff associated with contemporary Beatles records.
On the surface, the story appears simple.
A young man telephones a woman and asks her to meet him at the Clarksville train station. He has arranged for her to arrive by late afternoon, and he desperately wants to see her before he leaves.
Sounds like a normal romantic farewell.
It does. Nothing in the lyrics directly identifies him as a soldier. Vietnam is never mentioned. The military is never mentioned. We are not told where the train is taking him.
Stupid training tool!
I'm guessing no Dr. Johnny D.
Bite me!
But in 1966, young American men were being drafted and sent into an escalating war. Audiences would have understood the fear of sudden goodbye and the possibility that someone might not return.
So the song gives us the situation without giving us the uniform.
Precisely.
And that ambiguity allowed the song to work in two ways. It could be heard as a romantic pop record or as a farewell of a soldier about to be sent overseas.
Cheerful enough for the teenagers, serious enough for anybody listening closely. U.S. troop levels and military activity in Vietnam were expanding significantly during 1966. The song itself never explicitly mentions a soldier or the war, so the military interpretation depends upon its farewell narrative, its historical setting, and the narrator's uncertainty about returning.
Here's the part everybody brings up. Clarksville, Tennessee is near Fort Campbell.
Correct. Fort Campbell was, and remains, closely associated with the 101st Airborne Division, which served in Vietnam.
That sounds like the answer right there.
Except Boyce and Hart said they did not knowingly choose Clarksville because of the military installation. According to Hart, they were searching for a place name that sounded right. He remembered Clarkdale, Arizona, and the writers eventually settled on Clarksville because it sang better.
So the strongest looking piece of evidence may have been a coincidence?
Apparently so.
Danny, your deep dive just hit a sandbar.
Not necessarily. The accidental geographic connection does not eliminate the wartime interpretation. It simply means we should not claim that Fort Campbell inspired the title.
That's an important distinction. The song may carry a military subtext, even though the town's proximity to an army post was apparently unintended.
Hart said the name was derived from Clarksville, Arizona, and that the writers were unaware of Clarksville, Tennessee's proximity to Fort Campbell when they composed the song.
All right, Poindexter, did the writers ever actually call it a protest song?
Bobby Hart later described the story as involving a young man leaving during the Vietnam era. He also said that the writers could not be too direct with a Monkees song and had effectively slipped the darker idea into the record. That statement is the strongest evidence that the wartime undertone was intentional. But we should still be precise. Last Train to Clarksville does not protest a particular policy, condemn a government, or openly demand that the war end.
So it isn't Eve of Destruction.
No. It is better described as a subtle anti-war song, or perhaps a wartime farewell disguised as a pop romance.
A traditional protest song confronts the issue directly. This one creates sympathy for the person being sent away.
And because it leaves the circumstances unnamed, listeners can interpret it more broadly as a soldier's farewell, an uncertain romantic separation, or simply a dramatic pop narrative.
Which means our title asks the right question.
Was it one of the first Vietnam protest songs?
There is evidence for that interpretation, but calling it definitively one of the first requires caution. Explicit Vietnam-related protest records were already circulating before its release. What makes Clarksville notable is that the message may have been concealed inside an extremely commercial pop single. Hart's later account supports an intentional Vietnam-era subtext and says the writers could not make the message overly direct. However, because the lyrics never explicitly identify the war or advocate a political position, subtle anti-war commentary is more defensible than labeling it an unequivocal protest anthem.
And now we reach the great irony of Last Train to Clarksville.
The possible subject is fear, separation, and the prospect of never coming home. The lyrics suggest urgency and uncertainty, while the production delivers bright guitars, energetic percussion, hand claps, and an infectious refrain.
The darkness is hidden by the arrangement.
That may also explain why the song passed so easily into mainstream entertainment. It was catchy enough to promote a television comedy, yet serious enough to reward a closer listen.
And it worked! The song became a #1 hit. It reached the top of the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1966, turning a television group that had barely been introduced to the public into a genuine pop phenomenon.
Sometimes the happiest sounding records carry the heaviest stories. Great job as always, Danny.
Thank you, Crispy. May I try that surgeon training tool?
Absolutely. Let him try, Johnny.
Brainiac doesn't have a chance.
Oh, he got the butterfly in the stomach out. And that's the broken heart. Nice. Wow, he just pulled out the wishbone with no problem.
Give me that.
Before we go, tell us in the comments, do you hear Last Train to Clarksville as a Vietnam-era protest song?
You piece of crap.
A simple love song?
Come on.
Or both?
And while you're there, hit the like button, subscribe to the Senior Spinner Show, and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into the history behind the music.
From all of us here at WPCNS,
Do you want me to get that ankle bone for you?
I hate you, Danny.
keep spinning.